imagine that there's been a very violent murder and you don't know the person who's been murdered. You don't know why they've been murdered. You don't know anything about it. But for some reason, the police and the FBI are looking to you for answers because your things were found at the murder scene. Well, that's the premise of Harlan Coben's long-awaited book, When. Now, Wynne is the sidekick and best friend of Myron Boltaire in Coben's series about Myron Boltaire. Coben has a couple of series. He has a young adult series, and he has the Myron Boltaire series, and then he has some completely other books that they're not really part of a series. And actually, in my opinion, those are his best books. But in this book, we meet Wynn, and he's the side. Well, we don't meet him, we already know him, but we see him as the protagonist in this book, where he is pivotal. I won't say at the center of, but pivotal to a murder investigation. And the reason for that is because his suitcase was found at the scene of the crime, and he really doesn't know why. He has his ideas, but he's not sure. So I'm going to read you a passage, and in this passage, an FBI agent who is also an old friend of Wynn's is questioning him about the crime because a couple people are investigating this crime for various reasons. There's police, there's FBI, there's even mafia that are interested in this crime. But in this case, Wynn's FBI friend is asking him about the suitcase that was found at the scene of the crime. So it's on page 64 in the book, and he says, "Tell me about the suitcase." His voice has an edge. It is meant, I assume, to intimidate, but directed at me, it comes across as something more worrisome. It comes across as fear. "I'm waiting," PT says. "I know." "Why won't you tell me about your suitcase?" "I am protecting someone," I tell him. "Noble," PT says, "but I need to know." I hesitate, though in truth I knew that we would get to this point. "Whatever you tell me stays between us. You know that." PT leans back and gestures for me to go ahead. "My aunt gave me the suitcase when I was 14, I begin. "It was a Christmas present. She made one up for all of the males in the Lockwood family. Only the males. She gave the females a small makeup bag instead." Sexist, PT says. "We thought so too," I say. "We?" I ignore him. I also detested the bag. The whole idea of leather, monogram luggage, really, what's the point? I didn't want it, so a female relative and I traded pieces. I took up the makeup bag with her initials on it. She took my suitcase. Oddly enough, I still use the makeup bag as my travel toiletry bag. Like an inside joke. "Wow," PT says. "What?" "You're dancing, Wynn." "Pardon?" "I've never heard you over-explain like this. I assume it's because you don't want to tell me who the female relative was." He is correct, but there's no point in stalling. "My cousin Patricia." He looks confused for a moment. Then he sees it. "Wait, Patricia Lockwood?" "Yes." Dear Lord. Indeed. So his cousin Patricia was abducted by these two men who murdered her father and then abducted her to this place called the Hut of Horrors, where all kinds of young, beautiful girls were abducted and brutalized for days, weeks, maybe months on end. And some of the bodies were discovered, but some weren't. And his cousin Patricia escaped from the Hut of Horrors. And the FBI investigated that, and they remember that story. It would be like major news that, she packed her suitcase and went with these men and was held hostage in this hut and brutalized. Now, again, I'm a fan of Harlan Coben. So one thing I will say, thank you very much, Mr. Coben, for sparing us the graphic details of what went on in these violent crimes. I appreciate that in the book because I'm not really interested in reading, the specific details of someone being brutalized. That's not really what the book is about. The book is about like the whodunit aspect and trying to track down the bad guys. However, you do get a sense that, there are these characters that abducted this one woman, Patricia Lockwood, and they abducted many young people. And so that gives it sort of a scary feel. you want to catch those people, and you want to know if the guy who was murdered is one of the guys who abducted Patricia. So that's one aspect of the plot. There's a couple of different subplots going on. There's also trying to figure out what happened to the stolen paintings. The Lockwood family, when his family is very wealthy, and a Picasso painting and another painting were stolen. So there's always that aspect, like you try to figure out where the paintings are. And then there's yet another subplot. I think it's called the Jane Street Six. There's these teenagers to young college students who were involved in this terrible protest that went wrong and led to the tragic death of some other people, just innocent people. And the Jane Street Six, the teenagers who initiated the protest, were then on the run, and there's this whole underground lifestyle that they live as they're running, because the FBI would be after them too for the protests that they began that caused the tragic death of innocent people. So there's a couple of different subplots in the book, and I enjoy that about the book because it kept me reading, it kept me going to the end. But I do have to say that Coben's book Win for me would be a loss, and the reason for that is because, probably in all fairness, it's because I've read Harlan Coben's books so often, so many of them, that I've learned to appreciate the thing about his books is usually he takes the very ordinary and makes it extraordinary, in that the solution to the crime, like the person who did it, is usually really obvious and right under your nose throughout the whole story. And I know that reading his books, and still I usually get to the end and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I didn't see that. And I love that about his books, but because I love that about his books, this particular book, I figured it out pretty quickly. But if you're not familiar with Harlan Coben, it may surprise you. Maybe you will really spend the book trying to figure out, what happened. But there were some of the things in the book that were revealed at the very end that I guess they surprised me. I have to admit, I didn't really care enough about the characters in the book to be invested that much. I really liked Win in the Harlan Coben series, and when I got to know him in the book Win, I felt like he was just almost annoying. I felt like he was a little bit too much Myron and not enough Win. Speaking of Myron, it really bothered me that Myron Boltaire never showed up in the book. I mean, there's this whole series about Myron Boltaire, and you see Win as this really close friend to Myron Boltaire, and yet Win at one point in the book is hospitalized, and we sort of think maybe Myron popped in, but we never actually see Myron Boltaire, or there's no passage where he is present and interacting with Win in the book. And I thought that was inconsistent with the friendship that I had come to love as I read Harlan Coben's books about Myron and Win. Another thing about the book is, I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but toward the end of the book, almost the very end, it's not a spoiler. I will not give you a spoiler. But Win, he kind of tries to wax on and get into this lofty, like exploration of who he is or something. And I found that to be very annoying because it's inconsistent with who Win is, the Win that I've come to know when I read the Myron Boltaire series. So to give you an example, I mean, maybe if you can appreciate this, you'll enjoy this book. But for me, I just found it to be like a lot of annoying verbiage. But I'll read it to you and you can decide for yourself what you think. So this is toward the very end of the book. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I'll just read you Win reflecting on it. He says, life is lived in praise. That is the problem for most people. It is so much easier to see the world in black and white. Someone is all good or all bad. I try sometimes to glance online at Twitter or social media at the outrage, real, imagined, and faux. Extremism and outrage are simple, relentless, attention-seeking. Rationality and prudence are difficult, exhausting, mundane. Occam's razor works in reverse when it comes to answers. If the answer is easy, it is wrong. I warn you now, You'll disagree with some of the choices I make. Don't fret about it. I don't know whether I made the right ones either. If I was certain, per my personal axiom, I would probably be wrong. I found that kind of thing annoying. That wasn't the win that I grew to love in the Harlan Coben books. So you can read for yourself and decide. I did stick with the book. I read it from beginning to end, if for no other reason, just out of respect for Harlan Coben, because I absolutely love some of his other books. I would say to you, if you're looking for a really good book, I do recommend Harlan Coben, but I would recommend something like Fool Me Once, um, The Stranger, Missing You, or Home. I wouldn't go with Win.